Hey, 42 here. We humans have been going to war for as long as we've existed, and by now we've gotten pretty good at it. The rules of engagement are fairly simple. One side starts a fight, the other side retaliates. Then the first side retaliates to the retaliation, and so on and so forth, until someone runs out of land, or bullets, or spears, or whatever. Take World War II, for example. On one side were the Allies, including Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. On the other side were the Axis powers, including Germany, Italy, and Japan. Simple. Or was it? Because on the 5th of May 1945, just 3 days before the fighting finally came to an end in Europe, one of the strangest battles of the entire war took place. One in which America fought alongside Germany against, well, Germany. Bizarre, comical, and deadly serious in equal measure, the battle for Itter Castle was one of history's sideshows to the main event, an episode mostly forgotten when people tell stories about the biggest war in history, but one that perfectly captures the horror and absurdity of battle in one neat little tale. Like all good castles, the one found in the village of Itter in Austria was built on a hill. Constructed in the 13th century, it was originally a fortress, serving as a base for princes, counts, bishops, you know the type, before being badly damaged in 1526 during the German Peasants' War. The structure was eventually rebuilt in the late 1880s, but this time with a distinctly non-military usage in mind. It first served as a home to a famous pianist. Who knew there was so much cash in tickling the ivories? Before being converted into a hotel around the turn of the 20th century. A few decades later, it was rebranded again, this time as an upper-class lockup for VIP prisoners of war. In 1938, Austria was officially declared part of the Third Reich during what is now known as the Anschluss. That made Castle Itter Nazi property, and as the war developed, the former hotel became a sub-camp of the infamous Dachau concentration camp, located about 120 kilometers away. Being the rather fancy castle that it was, Itter was turned into a special prison that would house the so-called Ehrenhäftlinge, or detainees of honour, who were basically prisoners of particular value to the Nazis for one reason or another. They included high-profile members of German society that had fallen out with the Nazi Party, senior political figures from enemy countries, and even a few international sports stars. Even though very few of the Ehrenhäftlinge actually survived the war, for the most part, the conditions they were kept in were luxurious compared to the poor souls living in the concentration camps. There were no prison uniforms, and there was no forced labour, and they ate the same food as the soldiers who watched over them. Some of these prisoners were even able to live with their husbands or wives, and received rations equivalent to 9 times that of an ordinary German. In the final days of the war, which is when our story begins, the 14 prisoners held at Castle Itter were mainly Frenchmen, whose number included 2 former prime ministers, a couple of generals, a tennis champion, and several members of the French resistance. They were a pretty mixed bunch, all things considered, but they were unified by their unusual predicament. You see, by this point in the war, it had become clear that the Nazis weren't going to be winning. On the one hand, that was pretty good news, but in some ways, it only made the situation more dangerous for the prisoners of Itter Castle. The main camp at Dachau had recently been liberated by American troops, and the guards of Itter Castle deserted not long afterwards. That meant our ragtag band of VIP prisoners were essentially free to leave. But doing so was incredibly risky. The Third Reich may have been collapsing in spectacular fashion, but like an injured animal backed into a corner, the Germans were becoming more unpredictable with each passing day. The area around the castle was teeming with SS forces, with orders to kill any prisoners they came across. And that meant the former inmates, now occupants of Itter Castle, were trapped. And it was only a matter of time before the SS turned up to try and finish them off. With little of a choice, the prisoners prepared to defend themselves, taking up weapons that had been left behind by their former jailers. But it was clear they were going to need backup if they were to have any hope of surviving. A plan was hastily hatched and placed in the hands of, well, a handy man. Zvonimir Kuchcevic, a Yugoslav resistance fighter who'd been brought up to the castle to do some odd jobs, was sent out in search of reinforcements. He made his way to Innsbruck, where he located a division of US troops led by Major John Kramers, who, ignoring orders from his superiors, immediately dispatched a contingent of American soldiers to Itter Castle. But the group was forced back due to heavy shelling and never made it to the castle. When it became clear that help wasn't on its way, the prisoners at the castle sent out a second man to go in search of help. Czech chef and prison cook Andreas Krobot. Krobot made his way by bicycle to the nearby town of Virgil, where he was able to make contact with people claiming to be part of the Austrian resistance. I say claiming to be part of the Austrian resistance because the first thing these men did was deliver Krobot directly into the hands of Major Josef Gangl, commander of a unit of Wehrmacht soldiers. In other words, one of Hitler's henchmen. Or should I say, one of Hitler's former henchmen. You see, Gangl had defected, taking 20 of his former Wehrmacht soldiers with him to join the Austrian resistance. These ex-Nazis had been busy defending the people of Virgil against their former colleagues, the SS, who were arbitrarily executing anyone they deemed to be an enemy or a deserter, which, as it happened, was pretty much everyone. When Gangl heard about the plight of the prisoners trapped up at the castle, he immediately agreed to help. With only 20 men, Gangl knew he couldn't hope to defend Itter's prisoners from a full-on SS assault. So, instead, he used his resistance connections to make contact with a group of American soldiers he knew were stationed in the nearby town of Kufstein. There, he met Captain Jack Lee, commander of a tank battalion in the 12th Armoured Division, who quickly agreed to join the rescue mission. By the time the castle's new defenders showed up for duty, they were a bit of a motley crew. Captain Lee's rescue party included just 14 men and a solitary tank. And Gangl arrived with only 10 soldiers, having lost half of his men in a skirmish with the SS along the way. We've all been given Christmas or birthday presents that spectacularly failed to live up to our expectations, and I can only assume Castle Itter's prisoners were experiencing similar feelings of gratitude mixed with grave disappointment at the arrival of these reinforcements. On the one hand, it was great to have some experienced soldiers to lead the defence of the castle. On the other, 24 men and a single tank wasn't exactly an overwhelming force, and a direct assault on the castle from a heavily armed SS division would still be a huge problem. Which was a bit unfortunate, since that's exactly what happened next. Under the leadership of Captain Lee, the unlikely mismatch of both German and American soldiers lined up alongside Castle Itter's political prisoners in preparation for the impending attack. They didn't have to wait long. At dawn on the 5th of May 1945, around 150 Waffen-SS soldiers mounted a vicious assault on Itter Castle. But although the SS significantly outnumbered the defenders, they hadn't counted on meeting such a well-organised and spirited resistance. The castle itself also offered the defenders a huge tactical advantage. Still, the Waffen-SS soldiers were a fairly ruthless bunch, and many of them had had years of experience in the art of war. Crucially, they were also far better armed than their enemy. As the fighting intensified, the Nazi soldiers managed to blow up the defenders' sole tank with some well-placed artillery fire. They also successfully cut comms to the castle, but not before Major Gangle managed to place a call to the Austrian resistance in Virgil, requesting backup. It was to be Gangle's final act of the battle. He was taken out soon after by an enemy sniper while protecting former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud. The battle raged on, and soon enough the German and US forces defending the castle were running desperately low on ammunition. But it was at this point that an unlikely hero volunteered for active duty. Former tennis champion Jean Baratra, three-time winner of Wimbledon and apparently one brave son of a bitch. Dodging volleys of bullets and charging the net of the SS soldiers, the brave volunteer somehow managed to escape the castle siege on foot. And, as luck would have it, he soon stumbled across the nearby US 142nd Infantry. Baratra quickly filled in the unit's commanders on the grave situation up at the castle, before asking for a uniform and joining the rescuers, who immediately left on a mission to reach it before the defenders ran out of ammo. Like Gandalf at Helm's Deep, the relief force arrived just in time to break the advancing SS forces, about 100 of whom were taken captive. From there, it was all over pretty quickly, and within a matter of hours, the prisoners of Itter Castle were on their way home. Captain Lee was honoured with a Distinguished Service Cross for his courageous efforts, and Major Gangle, the only man to die during the battle, was celebrated as a hero. His sacrifice commemorated by a monument and a street in Virgil that bears his name to this day. After returning to France, some of the liberated prisoners made a massive impact on political policies that shaped the country in its post-war years. So, in some ways, the battle for Castle Itter was a history-defining moment. But even without those grand consequences, it was a peculiar story that's worth remembering, even if only for the courage of the people who looked beyond national flags and bound together to do what was right. Thanks for watching.